So on page in Lamed bottom of the page, Ois Gimel, and we were talking about two ways of the idea of the shofar. It's not just enough to have, first of all, the psukim of the shofar. It's also necessary for it to be a physical shofar blowing. And we spoke about there's two types of avodah, depending on the opinion, if the shofar needs to be a curved shofar, a bent shofar, or it has to be a shofar that is a straight shofar. And we're speaking about the avodah being straight in our service to Hashem, or being subservient and bent towards Hashem, and so on. So now we're going to continue in this. Ois Gimel, bottom of Shin Lamed Ches, the second page of the mind. So mitzvah b'shofar, that's what it says, that the mitzvah of the day is in shofar. They have avoided the shofar, the bezai fan, poshet the kayev, through the avodah in the shofar, the two approaches, both of the straight way and of the curved and bent way. That each one of them has its unique advantage. We draw down a new light for Begeres Kodesh, like it's explained in time. Every Rosh Hashanah comes down a new light that was never there. Through that new light coming down, all the way from its original source. That becomes now a renewal and a new revelation, an entire chain order descent of all the worlds. Till it becomes the novelty and uniqueness and newness, even in the most external parts of the world, even in the levels of the world that are down here, the most physical aspects of the world, like we spoke about, the shofar has to come and bring it down into the physicality of the world. As though the main uniqueness of Rosh Hashanah is in the inner parts of the world. Still in all, the newness and renewal becomes also in the external part of the world. It's explained in the Alter Rebbe Siddur that was recorded and written down by the Mittler Rebbe in the Maimer entitled to understand the matter of Tkiyas Shofar according to the intention of Baal Shem Tov, that explains this idea that through the renewal in the inner part of the world, that also affects the external world as well. All this is accomplished through the Yidden, who are the nation that is close to him. You are children to Hashem, your God. Like the Mezritcher Magid explains in his Sefer Morim and Torah at the beginning of the Sefer, what Chazal say, that who did Hashem consult when it came to creating the world? He consulted the neshamas of tzaddikim, and we've spoken about this many times. What does it mean that Hashem consulted the neshamas of tzaddikim? Does it mean that he sat down the tzaddikim around the table and he asked their opinion? Obviously not, because the very simple reason that if there was no creation of the world yet, because he was busy consulting about the creation of the world, so there was no neshamas yet. But rather, what does it mean he consulted the neshamas of tzaddikim, which means all Klal Yisrael, v'amich b'um tzaddikim? It means that it arose before Hashem, the delight that he would have in the service of the Yidden. And that brought the Ratzon, the will of Hashem, to create the world to its first state, which is known as Ratzon HaMuchlat. From that Ratzon HaMuchlat comes out to the revealed will. Essentially, there's the will, the way it's deeply seated inside of Hashem, that's called the Ratzon HaMuchlat, and then it eventually has to go through procedure for it to come out, that eventually Hashem has an open and revealed will to actually create the world. So Afterwards, it comes down the entire chain order of descent of the world until it's in this low world that there's no lower world than through it coming down and having this world down here below created. That's how the purpose that Hashem wanted to have a home down here below becomes fulfilled. Because obviously, we said that Hashem takes delight in the service of tzaddikim. The service of tzaddikim is only down here in this world. You would have all the spiritual worlds created. You would have Kesser, you would have Atzilus, you would have Bri, whatever. If you wouldn't have the physical world, none of that purpose would have become fulfilled. That's what Chazal say, that Hashem tells the Yidden, say before me verses that has to do with kingship, so that you shall make me a king over you. And how? With the shofar. What does it mean? How? What does it mean? Ubameh. What does it mean and how? That means shepirusha kiyas shofar ma'isa. That means the actual blowing of the shofar, the physical blowing of the shofar causes all this coronation to take place. Mitzvah yom b'shofar, because the mitzvah of the day is with the blowing of the shofar. But on the other hand, the Chazal also know from this phraseology that we also have to recite psukim of shofars as well. We cite 10 psukim of Malchus, 10 psukim of Zechronis, 10 psukim of shofar. So el shenichel bazeh, ahem shel askos ha'maimer imrul fonei b'shofars gam amiris psuki shofars. When it says with what, that's through the shofar. It does it since it said initially at the beginning of the statement of the Chazal, say before me psukim of Malchus. So also it goes on the psukim of shofars. So the words ubameh b'shofar, through what, and that is through shofar, includes also not just the blowing of the shofar, but also we have to recite the psukim of the shofars as well. And then ubefrat, the Rebbe says especially shalpizi yesh lahasim gishaseinu b'gemara. According to this, we can compare the girsa and the version of our Gemara, la girsa, according to the version that's brought down in other places. In it's called the Tosefta, imlu fanim malchis kedei chulu zechronis kedei chulu shofris kedei v'yafgersim lachras abameh b'shofar. It says in a different place, it says openly, say before me verses of shofars. But in our Gemara it says through what and with shofar. That means, in other words, that even in our Gemara where it says through what, through shofar, it includes both reciting psukim of shofars and also the blowing of the shofar. The Rebbe has a whole sikha that speaks about it at length, where it says ubameh b'shofar. It's the sichas chelek lamed daled, if I remember correctly. That speaks about this. Is it the psukim of shofars? Is it the blowing of the shofar? How do we learn pshat and Gemara where it says ubameh b'shofar, through what? Is it through shofar? Does that mean the psukim of shofar? Does it mean the blowing of the shofar? And essentially, both of them are connected to the words ubameh b'shofar. Okay. Any question before we go on to Isdal?
Which ones are they specifically referring to? Is this what we say like before, like Lamlat Se'aka?
No. We're talking about the sets of psukim that have been incorporated in the 3 extra brachas in Musaf. So the first extra bracha in Musaf, that after we finish that bracha in Musaf, Rosh Hashanah, we blow shofar. So over there, it's incorporated in that bracha 10 different psukim, the 4 taken from Chumash, 3 taken from Navi, 3 taken from Ksuvim, about Malchios, and then the following bracha has the 10 psukim incorporated into the bracha on about Zechronis, about memory, and Hashem remembering us. And the last bracha that we blow the shofar at the conclusion of incorporates 10 psukim concerning shofars.
Okay, I remember.
Okay, Ois Daled. Hine pasuk zeh v'biom simchaskum gomer with katam b'chatzotzes gomer. This pasuk and your days of rejoicing, and you shall blow with chatzotzes. Uhemshav v'siyam ha'inyan the lifnei is actually where it says it in Chumash. I mean, we actually say it in the Rosh Hashanah davening over there in the Pesukei Shofars. But if you look in the Chumash when it's talking about it, there's actually a continuation and a conclusion of what it says earlier in the Chumash over there. It speaks about it says that Moshe Rabbeinu was told by Hashem that you shall make for you two trumpets. And then it concludes that in the days of rejoicing and your holidays and whatever you shall blow, etc. You do a Torah Sarava Magi, and it's known the teaching of the Mizrach Magi. What does it mean, Chatzotzres? You could divide the word Chatzotzres, the Hebrew word for trumpet, into a word meaning half forms, meaning Haim da Kadosh Baruch Hu Muknes Yisrael. That the Jewish people on Hashem are, metaphorically speaking, and perhaps not even via metaphor, they are two halves of one whole. So in continuation of that, the Rebbe continues. And what it says in our pasuk, you shall blow with the chatzotzres. It shall be as a commemoration, it should be as a memory before your God. And I am Hashem your God. That earlier in the Maimer we said that Chazal used this pasuk to combine all three things. Ani Hashem Elokeichem means I am Hashem your God, meaning I'm your king. That has to do with zechroinus, memory. And then the idea of blowing. So you have all three together. That when you have one, you're supposed to have all three. He says in Malchus Ani Hashem Elokeichem, the idea of kingship, I'm Hashem your God. Zechroinus, the idea of memory and remembrance. V'hoil comes a should be for you as a commemoration. Shenas idea with Katam Chatzotzres. Chatzotzres because Shofar of Malchavaya through blowing in Chatzotzres, like it says also different pasuk until it says that with Chatzotzres and the sound of the Shofar you shall blow and trumpet before the king Havai. You should be Migdash, Lefnei Elokeichem, Lefnei Melchavaya Hayishneim. In the base of Migdash on Rosh Hashanah, they actually have both. They actually have both the trumpet blowing, the silver trumpets, and they also had the shofar. But the mitzvah of the day was with shofar, like it's explained in the Mishnah, and because of that, the Mishnah explains, and I might have mentioned it by a previous year, that the trumpets finished earlier and allowed for just the shofar to blow, because since the main mitzvah of the day on Rosh Hashanah is shofar, so therefore there was a period of a time of silence where the trumpet stopped, so you should only be able to hear the sound of the shofar. And by day, through the windows down the base of Mikdash, that were narrow on the inside and they were wide on the outside. The aperture of the windows was such that was narrow on the inside and wide on the outside. So that indicates that what the base of Mikdash was not about taking in light from the outside, but just the opposite. The base of Mikdash was about spreading light outward. So then this blowing of the shofar and this idea of the two half forms of the Yidden and Hashem comes from the base of Mikdash. It spreads outside within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael and into the entire world. And the Rebbe goes on to say, even at the time of Golus, where we don't have the physical base of Mikdash, it still spreads out from the time of the base of Mikdash. Because Yidden and Hashem are two halves of one whole. So he's going to explain what does it mean that Yidden and Hashem are two halves of one whole. But the idea behind this is, and the second soul amongst the Yidden, like Alter Rebbe says at the beginning of chapter 2 in Tanya, is a part of Hashem above in actuality, verily so. It's known that this has, in this statement, has the two extremes. And even the word mamish itself, he's going to speak about, has two extremes. Mamish koi al chelik al kam imal. Simply put, mamish, actually so, verily so, is going on what it says, a part of Hashem above. I knew this means shenefsha keshen should be sroli chelik mamish matzmus umuzi. That means that the second soul amongst the Eden is actually a part of Hashem's very essence. That's what the mamish comes to tell you. It's not just a metaphor. It's not just allegory. It's not just a nice turn of phrase. It's mamish that way. That's what the word mamish comes to tell you. You do a maimer about Shem to it's known the statement about Shem to Hashem Teufus, Bechelket Teufus, Bekuloi, anything. When you have the thing itself, when you have the essence of the thing, when you grasp one part of it, you're grasping the entire part. Meaning, for example, you have, let's say, a huge table, and you can't hold the entire table in your hand. But the very fact that you're grasping one end of the table, that means you're holding on to the table. You're not just holding on to that corner. You're holding on to the entire table. The same thing, a Yid, he might be a minuscule part of Hashem, but since he's a part of Hashem, it's Hashem himself that you're connecting with. On the other hand, the word mamish also tells us something from the other extreme. And the word mamish also indicates on the most lowest extreme, mamish, mamish also means from the word something that's tangible. A mamish is something that can be touched. And that's how low the neshama comes down, top of the next page. That's what it means that the second soul amongst the Eden is mamish, part of Hashem above. Shagam kishim elubeshes the guf mamish melosh mishush also when it's enclosed in the body. Mamish, what does it mean? That it's a body that's actually something that's tangible. Gam ozi chelik mamish musvas musvas. Even then, it's mamish still a part of Hashem's very essence. It doesn't take away from the neshama being part of Hashem. Chad mamish matzmus was the one with Hashem's very essence. Uketoyer said, like the teaching of the B'Zishur Mag that was brought down earlier. That it's two halves of one form. Since you are called Adam because you are similar to above, moving it's understood. That the idea of being two halves of one whole is not just the relationship between the Yid and Hashem, but since the Neshama and Hashem are similar, so the Neshama itself has these two things. He's going to explain what this means. The Inya Dua, it's known, the whole Neshama is based dargis klolius, and every Neshama, there's two general levels. There's the part of the Neshama above, which is also known as the mazel of the Neshama, the head of the Neshama. That is not the part that comes down to the body. Even when the person is born, even when part of the Neshama comes into the body, there still remains a part that is outside of the body, beyond the body. And then there's the Neshama, then there's a part of the Neshama that's in the body. The revealed powers, the foot of the Neshama. And these two levels are the two half forms that's in every specific neshama. In other words, there's a half of the neshama that's outside of the body, and there's a half of the neshama that's enclosed in the body. These are the two halves of one whole. Okay, so what does it mean now in the pasuk that we've been talking about? The Indian with Katim is going. What does this mean in our pasuk? That you shall blow in the chatzaitis, and they shall be for you as a remembrance before Hashem your God. We should sadach lachaber beis chatzait surah shaloi. A person needs to join his two half forms, ulhamidam abekshtel zelifnei Hashem lakechem, and to set them up before Hashem your God. Through the joining of these two half forms, the head and the foot, that's in every specific neshama. Through that becomes the joining of the head and the foot, that's generally in Yidden. And then being elevated before Hashem your God. So when we make the joining within ourselves, we cause also a joining with the whole Klal Yisrael and Hashem. That you are standing today, and today we know that day is going on Rosh Hashanah. All of you before Hashem your God, from your heads until the choppers of wood and to the water carriers. Kol Yisrael, all Yidden, Harosh Yisrael, Rashechem, whether it's the head of the Yidden, your heads, Varegel Yisrael, those are called the feet of the Yidden, the wood choppers and the water carriers, they become joined together. First of all, there's the joining of the head and the foot amongst the Yidden themselves. And then they stand fast. And then in turn, they rise up before Hashem your God. They become one with Hashem. Because of, like it continues in the pasuk to make you pass through in the covenant. The idea of a covenant is that the two people making a covenant between them, they become as one. That's why they cut this animal in half and they go in between the two parts. They indicate that just like this animal, which was once two separate parts, is now considered the people that are going through it like that one part, that they were one, just like the animal was one animal before. Any questions before we go on?
Is this saying each part of the soul, like nefesh, ruach, neshama, is all half ours and half Hashem's?
No. He's saying that the neshama in general has what's called the nefesh, ruach, neshama is usually the part of neshama that comes down to our body down here, and the chai yechida is the part that remains above by Hashem. But these are the two halves. So just like we say that there's the two halves, us and Hashem, also there's the two halves of the neshama. And through joining those two halves of the neshama, we cause a joining of the two halves of the neshama of the whole Klal Yisrael, and then that becomes a joining between us and our other half, which is Hashem.
Is this similar to the idea before Brooks Shamar?
So Shem Yichud Kudsha B'Richu Shkhinta you're talking about?
Yeah.
It's a similar, it has a similarity to that.
Okay.
Hey, page Shin Mem. Vbiom Simchaskum going with Katim Chatzot, so it's going on the Hashem Alakechem. That's what it says in your day of rejoice. You will blow with trumpets. I'm Hashem your God. Katem, when it says you will blow, it's referring to the blowing of the shofar. The mitzvah, the Rosh Hashanah b'shofar, the mitzvah of the day of Rosh Hashanah is with the shofar. Mission, like it's brought down the Mishnah. I mentioned this before. This Mishnah says shofar marich. The shofar allows its sound to go longer past the time when when the trumpets that are blown in the accompaniment stop and the shofar continues. Because the mitzvah of the day is with shofar. Days and nimsh when it's galagama in the chatzotzres, through that comes down and becomes revealed also the idea of chatzotzres, meaning Shakadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael and base chatzotzres, that Hashem and the Yidden are considered two halves of one whole. What does that mean that they're two halves of one whole? Yisrael and Mishroshim Batzmus Yisbar. The fact that the Yidden are rooted in Hashem's es, Vehem Hamachlitim Asarotzen, and they are the one that bring Hashem's will to its decision. Kanal, like we said before, Be'inim Be'minim, Tzadikim, that who Hashem consult concerning the will and the decision to create the world. That was in the Shamas of the Yidden that are called Tzadik. From that concealed will, which is known as Ratzna Mukhlat, comes out to the revealed will. Until it comes down here into this world, because this world is what is primary. That they're drawing down on all the levels, starting with Einig, that Hashem has a delight, like we said before, when he pictures what the tzaddikim will do, that causes a delight, and then he has a rotz, and then he has a will to actually create the world. And then it comes down to Moich and the intellect, and then it comes down to Midas and to the emotions and Malchus and to being a king and so on. But all of these levels, Einig, Rotzen, Seichel, Midas, Malchus, these are only stops to get to the goal, to get to where we have to get. This is all until it comes down to this world. That's the primary. That's an intermediary. Through that should come down here in this world. Before Botanic Kaddish, like to explain in Tanya, say the Rishkalshlos, who you read them upon Mizbar, that the entire chain order of descent, it was not the purpose of the creation. Whether Atzilas or Keser or Ak, as high as they are, they were not the purpose because they didn't gain. They only lost out because through their revelation, through their creation, they became lower and the descent from his life. Who the ultimate purpose is, in this low world, there's nothing bit lower than it. It's a deep pit. Specifically down here in this low world, the man was created. And was placed in the neshama, part of Hashem, variably above. By the also mitzvahs law of the l'shamra through his service and Torah mitzvahs to serve him, the Eibishter, and to observe the mitzvahs, the mitzvahs loisa, mitzvahs asay, mitzvahs loisa, like it says that Hashem placed all the Marish and Gan Eden of the l'shamra to work it and to guard it, which hints the Chazal say both at mitzvahs asay and mitzvahs loisas. Through that, Nishlam Kavana Dirab Tachtoinu will come to fulfill the purpose of a home down here below. A home for Hashem's very essence. Elo told us parents that should be. This is the history and the birth of Peretz, that it says when Yehuda and when Yehuda and Tamar had children, it said over there was 2 children, there were twins, and it says then one of them was Peretz. Peretz was the ancestor of David HaMelech, who's the ancestor of Mashiach. When it says Toldus Peretz, it says Toldus Malay, that it says the word Toldus full with 2 vavs. Whenever it could say without any vavs, it could say with 1 vav. When it said Toldus Peretz, it's with 2 vavs. That indicates that the offspring and the idea of what Peretz brought into the world that eventually will come from Mashiach is even higher than what it was at the beginning of creation. Because the beginning of creation, we know also the Olam al-Malu and Nivra, the world was also created full and complete and perfect, but it still doesn't reach the perfection of Mashiach's time. Because Peretz, Hoylid Goymer, as David Peretz gave birth and so on till David HaMelech, which comes from that, David Malch Mashiach, David Chin Mashiach. Even the base of Migdash, you will build the base of Migdash. Then we will actually have the blowing with the trumpets before your God. We will fulfill what it says in Tehillim, that with trumpets and the sound of the shofar, you will trumpet before the King Hashem. Literally, the base of Migdash, below 10 handbreadth. They avoid the goals. The tikkun b'chodesh through our avoid throughout the time of goals, of blowing in the month shofar, which shofar also the Chazal say is in the word shapru ma'asech, improve your actions, beautify your actions. And in a new way, like the exact expression of pasuk tikkun b'chodesh shofar, v'loy tikkun b'shofar b'chodesh. Yadu appears Baal Shem Tov asks a question: why does it say in the pasuk blow in the month shofar? To say blow the shofar in the month. Baal Shem Tov explains that the way I have to do Torah mitzvahs in the way of chodesh should be new. That's completely new. So the improvement of the actions, which the shofar shows an improvement of actions, has to be in such a way that all your actions are completely new. Of days and Nasa accomplished in making the 2 trumpets, Lamikra, Edel, Masa, Machnois, that says that what was the purpose of the trumpets? To gather the congregation and to make the camps travel. Less if it's called Yisrael Yachad, that means to gather all Yidden together. For a trip and for going from strength to strength, from a deep pit to a high building. Inyan and the idea when you will come to war, war with Nefesh and you'll be saved from that war idea. Through subjugating the Nefesh and transforming Nefesh. By days a year with through that you will blow with the trumpets before your God in the third base of Migdash, Yibana Mekarim Mamish will be built very soon. Aidem Shifted Canis from Mashiach, V'cholza V'ayfen V'yem Simchaskem, all this in the way of the day of your rejoicing, with Simchas Oilam Al Roshim, and everlasting joy upon their heads. Hey, remain in Mamish, speedily in our day, Mamish.